Welcome to part 2 in our series of messages titled Israel in Prophecy. Today we're going to be covering regathering Naphtali, Issachar, Zebulun, Ephraim, Reuben, Gad, Simeon, and Asher. As you know, we use Jeremiah 31 verse 10 as our foundational scripture. And in Jeremiah 31 verse 10, it says, "Hear the word of Yahweh, O nations, and declare it in the distant islands. He who scattered Israel will regather Israel and watch over her as a shepherd watches over his flock." Indeed, we have seen in a previous series of programs how God scattered Israel. And now in this series of programs, we're seeing how God is regathering Israel. In our first program, we saw God is regathering remnants of the tribe of Dan and Manasseh. So let's get into talking about Naphtali, Issachar, Zebulun, Ephraim, Reuben, Gad, Simeon, and Asher. Now here's the prophecy, another prophecy in addition to Jeremiah 31 verse 10. This is in Isaiah chapter 43 and verses 1 through 11. Isaiah chapter 43 and verses 1 through 11. It says, "But now Yahweh, who created you, Jacob, and he who formed you, Israel, says, don't be afraid, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by your name. You are mine. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you, and they will not overflow you. When you walk through the fire, you will not be burned, and flame will not scorch you. Don't be afraid, for I am with you. I will bring your offspring from the east and gather you from the west. I will tell the north, give them up, and tell the south, don't hold them back. Bring my sons from far and my daughters from the ends of the earth. Everyone who is called by my name and whom I've created for my glory, whom I have formed, yes, whom I have made." So this is the prophecy. Now we're going to see the reason for the prophecy as we continue on in Isaiah chapter 43, verses 1 through 11. We just read verse 7. Now we're going to pick it up in verse 8. This is the reason for the prophecy. "Bring out the blind who have eyes and the deaf who have ears. Let all the nations be gathered together, and let the peoples be assembled. Who among them can declare this and show us former things? Let them bring their witnesses, that they may be justified. Or let them hear and say, that is true. You are my witnesses, says Yahweh, with my servant whom I have chosen, that you may know and believe and understand that I am he. Before me there was no Elohim formed, neither will there be after me. I myself am Yahweh, and besides me, there is no Savior." The prophecy is talking about regathering Israel from the four corners of the earth. Why? Because Israel is God's witness. They testify by the fact that they are being regathered. They testify that they have been chosen by God. They were God's chosen people under the old covenant. Now the old covenant is over with, but God is still using them as a witness to say, I have chosen you as a sign that the end time is about to arrive. So when you see these prophecies being fulfilled of Israel returning to the land, you know that the number one Israelite, Jesus the Christ, Yeshua the Messiah, that he is about to return to the land. He's going to burst forth from the clouds. He will descend from heaven, and his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, and he will declare, I am he, the King of kings, the Lord of lords, the priest of priests, and every knee shall bow, and every tongue confess that I am God. That's what's going to happen. And the fulfillment of this prophecy, God regathering Israel, it is a sign. They are his witnesses. that he speaks his word, he's going to fulfill his word, and that the end time is very near. Now we're going to go back and cover something because a lot of people miss who the Israelites are. They only look at one segment of the Israelites and they think it's the entire population of Israelites. They miss that there are many hundreds of thousands, yes, even tens of millions of others who are also Israelites, but heretofore have not been recognized as Israelites, and it's primarily because of the color of their skin. These people who have hitherto not been known, not recognized, are people that you would call brown-skinned people, anywhere from tan, which is light brown, to middle brown, to dark brown, to dark brown. Most people only look at the Israelites as the people who are light brown, nearly white. Now, there are no truly white people and there are no truly black people. You have people who are all different shades of brown. And that's what we're about to cover here, is to show you that we're all one race, the human race. We're all one people in the sense that if you're a human being, you're a human being. You're not half monkey and half human. You're not half alien and half human, an alien from Mars. You're not half Martian, half Earth being. You are a human being created in the image and likeness of the God being, Elohim. And so we need to understand this so that we can see that we are all truly one family. We are all brothers and sisters. So there shouldn't be this racism from one group saying, no, you can't be an Israelite because you're black. There shouldn't be racism from another group saying, no, you can't be an Israelite because you're white. The truth is that Israelites come in all shades of brown, because all people who have ever been created from Adam and Eve are a shade of brown, just different shades. So this video that we're going to see after we read these scriptures really will help us to understand this from a genetic standpoint as well as from a scriptural standpoint. But let's read the scriptures first. And this picture here was developed by Answers in Genesis. That's the name of the group, Answers in Genesis. But before we go to Genesis, let's go to 1 Corinthians chapter 15 and verse 45. In 1 Corinthians chapter 15 and verse 45, it says, "And so it is written, the first man, Adam, was made a living soul. The last Adam was made a quickening spirit." The first Adam is talking about here is literally Adam, who was created as the first physical human being. And then when it talks about the last Adam, it's talking about Yeshua the Messiah. And the reason why it's written like this is the first Adam brought sin into the world, and the second Adam, the last Adam, brought sin out of the world. And Yeshua is the second Adam. The way he brought sin out of the world is because he never sinned, yet he died on the cross, and his shed blood and his death is what removes all sins that have ever been created. His one life, and in fact, one drop of blood of his life, is more valuable than all human beings who have ever lived, because it was the Father who created all human beings through Yeshua the Messiah, the Son of God. So that's what this is talking about. And the primary thing we want to focus on is that the first human being on the face of the earth was named Adam. He was created directly by God Almighty. So now let's go to Genesis chapter 3, verse 20. This is Genesis chapter 3 and verse 20. And here it says, "Adam called his wife's name Eve because she was the mother of all living." In other words, you had the first man, Adam, and here we see the first woman is Eve. They got married, and then they had children. That's why it says she is the mother of all living. Now, obviously, she did not give birth to Adam. Adam was directly created by God, and so was Eve. Eve was directly created by God because she was taken out of the rib of Adam to be by his side, his helpmeet, and he is the head. She is the helpmeet. And together, they were supposed to form a perfect, loving couple. And this loving couple, not only loving one another, but loving their creator, their heavenly parents, if you will. Unfortunately, they didn't do that. But we know that they did have children. And so when it says she's the mother of all living, it means that she is the mother of all people who have ever been born through a natural process. So again, Adam and Eve were both directly created. Everybody after that was born through a sexual relation where the sperm inseminates the egg, and then a child is carried in the mother's womb, and that child is then born. So she is the mother of all living. And they did indeed have children, Adam and Eve. That's in Genesis chapter 5 and verse 4. Genesis chapter 5 and verse 4. And the days of Adam after he had begotten Seth were 800 years, and he begat sons and daughters. Obviously, Adam and Eve together begat sons and daughters. They first had Cain and Abel. Cain killed Abel, and after Abel died, they together, Adam and Eve, had another child named Seth. And then after Seth, they had other sons and daughters. Let's now go to Genesis chapter 9. This is Genesis 9, and we want to read verses 17 through 19. This is talking about Noah and his wife and their sons. And of course, their sons also had wives. So this means that there were 8 people, as we're going to see, who came through the flood. In verse 17, Genesis 9. And Elohim said to Noah, this is the token of the covenant which I have established between me and all flesh that is upon the earth. And of course, that was the rainbow covenant. Verse 18, and the sons of Noah that went out of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And then verse 19, these are the 3 sons of Noah, and of them was the whole earth overspread or repopulated. Adam and Eve had many children, then those children also had children, but then, of course, evil expanded as the number of people expanded. The amount of evil also expanded to the point where God said, I'm going to wipe humanity off the face of the earth with the exception of Noah, who found grace in God's eyes. And he also, by extension, spared Eve and spared their 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their 3 daughter-in-laws, so that the earth could be repopulated. And that's what we see here. And then the earth was repopulated, and people began to multiply on the face of the earth again. And we come to Genesis chapter 11. This is Genesis chapter 11, in verses 8 through 9. Starting in verse 8, it says, so Yahweh scattered them abroad from there upon the face of all the earth. And so the people left off building the city. Therefore is the name of it called Babel, because Yahweh confused the languages right there. And from thence he scattered all of the people abroad upon all the 4 corners of the earth. What happened at the Tower of Babel, after mankind multiplied, sins again began to multiply. And in defiance to God, they were building a tower up into the sky. Perhaps it was to say, we're going to live in the clouds so that if a flood ever came, we wouldn't be wiped out. Or maybe some people even believe that the tower might have been something they were working on to be like a rocket ship to get off the earth. I don't know about that one, but whatever it was, It was in defiance of God Almighty. And God said that, wow, people are, again, really doing a lot of evil. And because they're so intelligent, because they are created in my image and likeness, if I don't do something, they're going to basically wipe themselves off the face of the earth because of their sin, because of the evil that they're exhibiting. And so I need to do something. So what God did was he said, I'm going to, first of all, confuse their languages. And that's what Babel means, is confusion. So when a person is babbling, it means they're speaking incoherently. You can't understand them. And that's what God did. He confounded, confused the languages, caused them to babble, basically. That's why the place is called the Tower of Babel. And also gave rise to a city named Babylon, which also gave rise to an empire, the Babylonian Empire. And that's a bunch of confusion. It also gives rise to what we see in the book of Revelation, where it talks about this beast and false prophet, this woman who's the false prophet riding on top of a beast, which is a government system. So it's church and state combined together. And it says, this is Mystery Babylon, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. It's confusion, this religion that is false Christianity, frankly, that has spread throughout all of the earth and caused so much confusion because the Pope, the bishops, the cardinals in the Roman Catholic Church system, and then all of your so-called reverends, and we never call anybody reverend because we only revere one entity, well, actually two, the Father and the Son, both God beings. That's the only ones we reverend. So whether it's the people who are called reverend or apostle or bishop, that all are part of the Protestant movement that came out of their mother church in protest. And so if the Catholic Church is called the mother of harlots, as it is in Revelation chapter 17, if she's the mother, she has daughters. And who came out of the mother church, the Catholic Church? Her daughters, the protesters, the Protestants. So this false Christian system that does not teach what's in the Bible, for the most part, there is so much error that's being taught in the name of Jesus the Christ that is absolutely ridiculous. But that's described as a Babylonian system because it's confusion. It's like you can't understand that stuff because when you know the truth, it's like, how do they come up with this nonsense? And one example, just one example, is how can you get 3 days and 3 nights from a Friday crucifixion, and this would be Friday evening when Jesus was put into the grave, to a Sunday morning resurrection? That's just stupid. And it is very confusing to anybody who looks at it as they try to figure that nonsense out. The truth is that Yeshua was put into the grave on a Wednesday evening, but people don't notice because people don't today observe the Passover. And that's again because the Catholic Church cast all of this truth aside and said that the annual appointments of God, being Passover, days of unleavened bread, what we call Pentecost today, the Day of Trumpets, the Day of Atonement, the Feast of Tabernacles, the last great day, those 7 annual appointments. No, those are done away with, as well as the weekly Sabbath, which happens on Friday night to Saturday night sunset. All of that stuff, that's Jewish. No, get away from that. And the Jews killed Jesus. Get away from that. Well, of course, it was both Jews and Gentiles. Everybody is responsible for the murder of Jesus Christ because all have sinned, all have fallen short of the glory of God. So that's a bunch of nonsense. But also, there's nowhere in the Bible where you see that God has done away with those things. That is not old covenant. It was not just for Israel. It's not legalistic to follow them. But when you have this false Christian system teaching that, and the majority of the people in the world who claim to be Christian bow down to the Pope and bow down to their bishop and listen to this nonsense, these lies that are taught, that's a Babylonian system. So the truth is that Yeshua was actually crucified on Passover in 30 AD. And if you go back and look and see when Passover was in 30 AD, you'll see that it was on a Wednesday. So he was put into the grave. Let's say that sunset was 6 o'clock. He would have been put into the grave at maybe 5 o'clock because Joseph Arimathea wanted to take his body down from the cross before sunset, because what was arriving was the annual Sabbath, not the weekly Sabbath. And again, people are deceived about that, thinking it was a Friday, but actually the annual Sabbath was coming on that Wednesday evening. So he's put into the grave Wednesday right before sunset. Let's say again, put in the grave at 5 o'clock. So now count 3 days and 3 nights, 72 hours. You got from Wednesday at 5 p.m. to Thursday at 5 p.m. to Friday at 5 p.m. to Saturday at 5 p.m. That's when Yeshua would have been resurrected after 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth, as it says in Matthew chapter 12, verse 40. But because you have this false Babylonian confused system teaching error and deceiving people, and the one behind it is Satan the devil, because he's the one that deceives the whole world, then you have this whole world believing nonsense, believing stuff that you got to scratch your head and say, that's confusing. I don't see how he could be crucified on a Friday and be put into the grave at 5 p.m. And then it's 3 days and 3 nights. If I go from Friday at 5 p.m. to Saturday at 5 p.m. to Sunday at 5 p.m., it should be Monday at 5 p.m. that he would be resurrected. But of course, you have this lie, this deception, this confusion that people teach. So they got to make up all kind of stupid reasoning to try to justify that. So that's an example of what happened at the Tower of Babel. God confused the languages, and people are still confused today through false Christianity and through other false religions. But the other thing God did at the Tower of Babel was he scattered people abroad, because now by putting distance between people, not only is it difficult to communicate with each other because you're speaking a different language, it's also difficult to communicate because people are at a distance. And people at that time had not developed the telephone or the radio or the internet. And so communication was very challenging and difficult. The other thing, the third thing that it doesn't specifically say here in the scripture, but you'll see with other scriptures, is he also shortened people's lifespan. At that time, people were living to be 600, 700, 800, even 900 years old, but he shortened the lifespan to be gradually decreasing so that today people don't live any more than 120 years. And that was also to stop people from living so long, accumulating so much knowledge and being able to pass it on to others, that evil would be able to spread very rapidly to the point where people would annihilate themselves. So it's kind of interesting that what we have now is a return, in a sense, to the Tower of Babel. Things have been reversed. What do I mean by that? Well, now you have it where in your hand, in your phone, you can speak your native language, and you can use Google Translator, and it will translate what you're saying into another language that you don't even know. So for instance, if I'm speaking in English, but I'm speaking to someone who speaks French, Google Translator will translate what I'm saying in English into French so that that person can understand me. So now we have languages, those barriers broken down, where even though people might not be able to speak the same language, they can still communicate with each other because you have a translator who makes it possible for us to understand one another. On top of that, I can be talking to someone in France over the phone. So distance is no longer a problem. It's not a barrier. I can do a WhatsApp to someone for free, and that's to someone in France, and be using Google Translator and be communicating with them. So these barriers have been broken down. And what we see is more and more confusion in the earth. And what we see is more and more evil in the earth. So now the internet, for instance, is used to organize people to launch an insurrection against the Capitol, which happened on January 6th of 2021. Here you have insurrectionists who are trying to overthrow the government to keep a person in office who legitimately lost not only the popular vote, but the Electoral College, in which he said when he had won 4 years prior to that was a landslide. But because he wanted to be a dictator, a thug like his buddy Vladimir Putin, he decided that he wanted to rally people and overthrow the government, and his cultish, crazy followers did exactly that. They attacked the Capitol and were wanting to hang the vice president, Mike Pence, to kill the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, the second and third people in line of the presidency, eliminate them, put this autocrat in power. That's what happened, actually. So we're talking about evil increasing and evil being called good and good being called evil. And we can see in so many other places a return to the Tower of Babel, confusion. So now let's read in Acts chapter 17, verse 26. This is Acts chapter 17 and verse 26. It says, God has made of one blood all nations of people, for to dwell on all the face of the earth, and has determined the times before appointed and the bounds of their habitations. In other words, from one blood, we're all one blood, all of us bleed the same, we're all red-blooded, whatever, Americans, British, Nigerian, Jamaican, whatever, we're all one blood. We might be in different nations, we might have different cultures, but we're all one people, and we're all descended from one couple, Adam and Eve. So that's the beauty of it. So now let's look at this video from Answers in Genesis, and we're going to see, genetically speaking, how our Father and our Lord created us, because the Father gives the order, the Word speaks it, all things were created through the Word, and we came into existence. And so we're going to see how this is done from a scientific genetic standpoint. And this is just an excellent video. And this is Science Confirms the Bible. That was the name of the topic, Science Confirms the Bible. And this was conducted by Answers in Genesis.
Another thing, people say, okay, but then how do you get all the different races of people? Some people think that, oh, to get all the so-called races of people, God must have made different races to start with. Wait a minute. We're all descendants of one man and one woman. The gospel message is for every tribe and nation, because we're all of one race, because we're all descendants of Adam, we're all sinners, and Jesus Christ became a member of the human race to die for the descendants of Adam. There can only be one race of people.
I hear this one a lot. How can there be so many races in the world if we are all descendants of Adam and Eve? Well, check this out. First off, let's talk about the word race. Sometimes when people use the word, they mean supposed races of people who have evolved at different times, rates, and in different locations. That's not true. Of course, the word race is also a term we use to distinguish between groups with different physical traits, namely skin color. But are there really different races? Take a gander at Acts 17:26, where it is written that God, from one man, made every nation of men. It's clear then that the Bible teaches that there is one race, the human race. The Bible is also clear that all people on the earth are descendants of Adam and Eve, who were created by God. Check Genesis 1:26 through 28. Easy enough. God created two people in his image, male and female, and told them to increase in number. So Adam and Eve are mom and dad of the human race. Then their children had children, and those children had children, and so on and so forth for many generations until, according to Genesis 6:9, the world's population was reduced to 8 people who were protected inside an ark during a global flood. And those 8 people later walked off the ark, and according to Genesis 9:19, from them came the people who were scattered over the earth. But wait a second. What do I mean scattered? Well, jump over to Genesis 11 and let's talk about an event known as the Tower of Babel. Basically, because of the sinful actions of the descendants of Noah, the Lord confused their language and scattered them from there over all the earth. That's pretty clear and concise. Okay, so we've got lots of people who are descendants of the 8 folks who came off the ark, and now they have been scattered all over the earth. That explains that we are still one race and that different groups of people ended up in different locations. But how do we get a bunch of different colored people if we are all one race? Well, follow along. This, of course, is a simplified explanation, but the basic principles are true. We all have a pigment in our bodies called melanin, which, depending on different variables, produces different shades of the one main skin color we all possess. Several genes control the amount of melanin produced and thus the variability in the skin shade. In fact, it's easy for one couple to produce a wide range of skin shade variability in just one generation, as we'll see in just a moment. Time for a quick genetics lesson. DNA is the molecule of heredity that is passed from parents to children. A child inherits 23 chromosomes from each parent. Each chromosome pair contains hundreds of genes, which regulate the physical development of the child. However, to illustrate basic genetic principles pertaining to the topic, we'll just talk about two genes, the genes that control the production of melanin. So, let capital A and capital B symbolize versions of the gene that code for large amounts of melanin, while little a and little b code for small amounts. Got it? Easy. Check this out. Take a look at the upper left. Let's say dad contributes capital A, capital B genes, and mom contributes capital A, capital B genes as well. Together, they will produce a child with capital A, capital B, and capital B. This is a kid with a lot of melanin, and thus he will have very dark skin. Easy to see. Here's the bigger point, though. Let's say dad contributes capital A, capital B, and mom contributes little a and little b. Well, the child's skin will be middle brown shade, the combination of capital A, and capital B, little b, which, by the way, represents a majority of the world's population. Not only that, but if each parent is capital A, capital B, little b, the combinations that could be produced in their children could result in a very wide range of skin shades in just one generation. So, since Adam and Eve were the first people ever, it makes sense to conclude that God placed in them a combination of genes that could produce all different shades of skin we see. Those same combinations would be present in Noah and the 7 other people who boarded the ark. And because God dispersed people at the Tower of Babel, he dispersed the population, thereby isolating gene pools in the different people groups. Over time, different cultures formed in different locations with certain features like skin shade becoming predominant. And here we are today. And since we all go back to Noah and his family, it makes sense that we are all different shades of brown. One race, multiple people groups, just like the Bible teaches. Simplified for sure, but enough said.
It's very easy to understand. That's why you find instances like this. These twins were born in Australia, one dark, one light. These twins were born in England, one dark, one light. When we have children, we have 5 children, they all look a little different to each other. You know why? They all have different combinations of genes. But it all goes back to the original gene pool.
So that was a very simple explanation, but an excellent explanation. And you saw what they were saying is that all people who were descended and who are descended from Adam and Eve are simply different shades of brown, and the original people, Adam and Eve, had to be people who were that middle shade of brown, and the majority of people in the world today are still that middle shade of brown. But then you have some who are darker brown going toward black, some who are lighter brown going toward white, but we're all one race, we're all from one blood, we're just different groups of people in different locations. Our environment can have an effect on us, but from a genetic standpoint, even though that was a simplified version, it gives us a very deep understanding. So now, again, the main reason why we even cover that in the first place is so that when you see the various tribes of Israel coming back to the land of Israel, and you see that some of them are considered brown-skinned people, you're not going to be amazed. And worse yet, you're not going to deny the truth. You will be able to accept the truth. And that's the beautiful thing about learning this. And so now let's get into the lost, quote unquote, tribes of Naphtali and Issachar. Now they were located in Uzbekistan or Uzbekistan. Now, where is that? A lot of people don't know where that is. So we'll show you on this map. You'll see Uzbekistan, which is below Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan is this big, I guess that's kind of like a yellowish, orange, yellowish, Kazakhstan right at the top. And below that, in this kind of grayish color, grayish blue color, is Uzbekistan. So this is the area that we're going to be focusing on for these first 2 tribes that we're talking about. And you're going to hear in the upcoming video about Samarkand, which is right here, and Bukhara, which is below here. Now notice also that you have Turkmenistan, just to give you the geography, which is south of Uzbekistan. You have Afghanistan, which we're going to be talking about, some of the tribes of Israel being located in Afghanistan, which is absolutely amazing. And that's to the south also of Uzbekistan. Then you have Tajikistan, that's to the east of Uzbekistan, and Kyrgyzstan, that's to the northeast. And then to the east of Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan is China. To the east and south of Afghanistan is Pakistan. And to the east of Pakistan is India. So that gives you an idea. And on the western side, to the west of Pakistan and Afghanistan, and to the south of Turkmenistan is Iran. And then if you go further over to the left, you have Iraq. To the north of Iran, you have Azerbaijan and Armenia. And above Armenia, you have Georgia. And then you have Russia as you cross over the Caucasus Mountains. So as you are leaving Azerbaijan and Armenia and you're crossing into Georgia and into Russia, you're crossing over the Caucasus Mountains, which we'll have a little bit to say about later. This gives you your geography. And if you have a test, I hope you're going to pass the test, but let's go back to the video. So we're talking about the tribes of Naphtali and Issachar. And this is taken from a documentary by Simcha Jacobovici entitled Quest for the Lost Tribes.
There's 1.5 million Menashe. That's a lot of people. Where are the rest? So we said, okay, let's go back to the ancient sources. Where did they go? Where did they go? The Assyrians, who destroyed the northern kingdom of Israel and took the people into exile, had a propensity for making wall reliefs. And this is very fortunate for us, because it's almost like having someone with a video camera, a journalist with a video camera, present 2,700 years ago. Because after they destroyed the Israelites, they went home, created palaces, and created these huge wall reliefs showing the destruction.
You see them being killed, and you see them being taken prisoner, and you see them being deported. And it's a very clear difference. Obviously, killing is one thing. You see them being flayed alive. Taken prisoner, you only see men taken prisoner, and you see them being deported, you see them being deported in family units. So we've got a lot of evidence. They never deported people as just the men or just the women to be concubines or something. They deported families. They kept them together.
The only group of charioteers that the Assyrians retain intact as an elite unit of charioteers is an Israelite unit from Samaria. What this means is that they were appropriated by the core of the empire to the service of the center of the empire. The Israelite charioteers are retained intact.
The fact that they were kept together in military and family units gave us hope that perhaps they had survived the deportations after all. From the Assyrian records, we learned that in the first assault, Assyria sacked 7 Israelite cities of the tribe of Naphtali and put the Naphtalites on the volatile border with Media. As the Assyrians lost ground to the Medes, the Israelites found themselves under Median rule in an empire that extended from modern Iran to Central Asia. Any Israelites living in Iran were later absorbed by mainstream Judaism. It was pointless to search here. Perhaps we would find the lost Israelites behind the former Median Empire, along the superhighways of the ancient world, across Uzbekistan, on the road to China. We picked up the trail in Uzbekistan, home to the legendary cities of Bukhara and Samarkand. Here we found ourselves in a forgotten region that had once been the prize of Alexander the Great and the Mongol warlord Genghis Khan. Founded over 2,500 years ago, Bukhara was the cultural center of the region.
From this place, one could go and trade in all directions. The city of Bukhara is really at the crossroads. The legendary Silk Route, which started in the 2nd century, came right through Bukhara. In the 12th century, the famous Jewish traveler Benjamin of Todela wrote that there was a Hebrew tribe here which considered itself to be one of the lost tribes that were exiled by the Assyrians.
خانه‌پور مهمان آمده است شش صندوق جان تصدوق خانه‌پور مهمان.
As late as the 19th century, British missionary and explorer Joseph Wolfe reported that the lost Israelites could still be found living in Bukhara. Legend has it that the most ancient tombs here date back to biblical times, but we could find no markings linking them to Israelites. Not far from these tombs is a Jewish community of uncertain origin. The first clue that they are related to the lost tribes is the name Issachar, common in this area and nowhere else. Issachar is one of the lost tribes, and many of the people here, including the local rabbi, claim Issachar as an ancestor. The Issachar lead did not take us any further, so we explored the Mahala, the Jewish quarter, to see if there was a connection to the tribe of Naphtali, also exiled to this area. At first, it seemed that all we could ascertain is that the community is very old.
For many hundreds of years, we've been preparing matzah in this oven. It is a very, very old custom. These customs are ancient, thousands of years old. When God gave us Jerusalem, we were preparing matzah by hand, just like this.
While the women prepare unleavened bread for Passover, the men slaughter a sheep in accordance with the biblical law. The tradition of the Paschal lamb is as old as the Bible itself. A sheep is slaughtered with an extra sharp knife in one quick cut. The blood is then drained and removed. At the time of the Exodus, a bush would be dipped in the blood and smeared on doorposts, identifying those homes as Israelite.
I'm rendering this animal kosher, as we have always done.
How are you doing that?
I'm discarding the sciatic nerve here, in accordance with Jewish law.
When they were first discovered, they didn't claim to be Jews, they claimed to be Israelites. It's only in the last few hundred years that they've integrated themselves into the body of the world Jewish community. And the Bukharan Jews are important because they tip you off that the history of the lost tribes is a hidden history, that there are political reasons why their history would have been hidden. So for example, in Bukhara, in Uzbekistan, this country that was part of the former Soviet Union, anything Israelite was hidden and locked up.
because it was not in the interests of the local authorities to say that Israelites were here before the supposedly indigenous people. And in Bukhara, we actually had a guide who ran the Bukharan Museum who was torn between pursuing the truth and looking out for himself in a political climate where it's still policy to hide anything Israelite. So for example, he gave us access to the basement of the Bukharan Museum. On top in the museum you have all the official history, and in the basement, locked up, you have anything Israelite. And what's in this musty, dank basement? Prayer books, silver platters with Hebrew alphabet on them, locked up. Torah scrolls, Bible scrolls are locked up as if they're some kind of state secret. Anything with a Hebrew letter, anything signifying some kind of historical Israelite presence, locked up. And then when we asked him about Israelites, he didn't want to talk directly about Israelites, but he said, you know, there were these people here that ruled Central Asia for 200 years, and they were called Naphtalites.
From our recent digs, we've learned that in the 6th century, Bukhara was the capital of a mighty kingdom of Semites, which also ruled parts of India, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. Now, in the 19th century, the Russian writer Shubinsky believed that it was in this region that the Israelites were settled. But the people who ruled the area were called Naphtalites. And right up to the present day, we are still debating the origins of the Naphtali dynasty of Bukhara.
Who are these Naphtalites? Have you ever heard of Naphtalites? Any Naphtalites here? I don't want to offend anybody. Looking in the Britannica, and I found Naphtalites. And what does the first line say? It says, this much-named and enigmatic tribe ruled Central Asia in the 5th and 6th centuries. Are we following here? Much-named, many names, and enigmatic, mysterious tribe. Now, why is a tribe that ruled Central Asia for 200 years mysterious? You'd think you'd get to know them after the first 100 years of rule. The second sentence was revelatory as well, because it says they were known to medieval writers as Naphtalites and Naphtalites.
It seemed to us that the Naphtalites must have been the lost tribe of Naphtali, but we wanted some hard archaeological evidence. We went to the Tashkent Institute of Archaeology, where we gained access to a restricted facility containing a treasure of ancient artifacts. Among them, 2,200-year-old potsherds. Clearly displayed on the ancient clay is Aramaic script, the day-to-day language of the Israelite tribes. Here we also met Professor Usmanova, a semi-retired archaeologist.
And what does she have? She has, wrapped in a tea towel, a 1,700-year-old religious ritual object with Hebrew writings, with an Israelite name, with ram's horns. A religious object of Israelite origin from exactly the area that the lost tribes went to 1,000 years after they supposedly disappeared.
Now there are only a few isolated Bukharan Jewish enclaves, including this one, in the jewel of Central Asia, Samarkand, a city with a history dating back more than 2,500 years. The word Khand in the local dialect means city. Samarkand translates as the city of the Sumerians. Samaria was the capital of the northern kingdom of Israel. We continued along the Silk Route towards China. The city of Kaifeng was the capital city of the Han Dynasty. Following the Naphtali trail, we learned that the Chinese records say that the Naphtalites were here. They were labeled Jews or Yuda by the Chinese. It is virtually impossible to identify a Jew in Kaifeng today. But there was one government official who was willing to talk.
There was a Jewish community, but now there is no more Jewish community. There is no Jewish community anymore. Only a few families. This is the synagogue, former site of a synagogue.
Okay, and can you write also here the two family names?
Only for your reference.
I understand.
And most likely, and you will be refused.
这个没有。
No, 不在这儿，我帮你问一下。
We did not find lost tribes in China waiting in their millions. But could the last Jews of Kaifeng help us in our quest?
About 300 years ago, our synagogue ceased to exist. Without the synagogue, there was no place for the Jews to congregate. Without a congregation, there were no more rabbis. Without the congregation, without the rabbis, without the religious rituals or readings of the scriptures, there was no more worship. Nothing was left.
Nonetheless, to this day, there are Chinese people in Kaifeng whose identity papers still describe them as Jews, Yuda.
Yudai, this is his name, right? Yes. Does he think he is a Jew?
他问你现在你自不自己还感觉你是犹太人？
当然是这样，是这样的。
Yes, 是。
在我民族意识还是有的，民族意识。
So you can see here several interesting things. One is that he talks about Samarkand as being the city of Samaria. And we know that Samaria was the capital of the lost 10 tribes of Israel. Coincidence? Don't think so. The fact that there are people there who self-identify as being descendants of the tribe of Naphtali and Issachar shows you something. The fact that they have these ancient cultures and rituals that are biblical, like observing Passover, slaughtering a lamb, practicing kosher eating. This tells you something. And what it tells you is that these people are descendants from the tribes of Naphtali and Issachar. But how many of us have heard this before? Well, it's not that it's totally unknown, because you also heard him refer to two authors, Benjamin of Todela and also Joseph Wolfe from England, who wrote about these people. And so we're going to read some of what they wrote shortly. You have Joseph Wolfe in a book titled Travels and Adventures of Joseph Wolfe. This is on page 244 and 256. And this book was published in 1861. He was one of the travelers. This is the one from England. He was one of the travelers that Simcha Jacob Ovici mentioned in his documentary, Quest for the Lost Tribes. So this is what is written according to Joseph Wolf. Wolf had set his heart upon going on a mission to Timbuktu, which is in Mali, but a person named Frere said to him, "If you go there, you will dwindle away into a simple traveler, and you ought to maintain your missionary character. And therefore, I will point out to you on the map the road to Bukhara and Afghanistan." And we remember that Bukhara is in Uzbekistan, and Afghanistan, where you will find not only Jews, but traces of the 10 lost tribes of Israel. That was on page 244. Now on page 256, Wolf responded, "I go about in the world to proclaim that Jesus Christ came the first time to suffer for our sins, and that he will come the second time to reign on earth in majesty and glory. And I am now going to Bukhara in order to find out the 10 tribes of Israel." And then from the same book on page 272 and 293, starting with page 272, at last Mullah Israel opened his mouth and said, "You have sent us a Hebrew book of which we became possessed only a few centuries back. For as we are not the descendants of those Jews who returned from Babylon to Jerusalem in the time of Ezra, we had not all the books until we got them, as I before said, a few centuries back from Orenburg in Makariev in Russia. We were all settled at first in Bukhara, Samarkand, and Balkh, and then we came on here." Let's pause for a second to let that soak in. You also remember hearing in the video that the people who said that they are Naphtalites, they said also that they were not Jews, that they were Israelites. And remember that the 12 tribes of Israel, and really 13 tribes because there was Ephraim and Manasseh, but often it's still called 12 tribes because Levi did not have any territory. They were dispersed throughout the 12 tribes, but it's really 13 tribes. You remember that 10 tribes were in the north. They were called the house of Israel, and 3 tribes were in the south. They were called the house of Judah. The 3 in the south were from the tribe of Judah, Benjamin, and Levi. And so then you can count the other 10, which includes Ephraim and Manasseh. And so they said, these people who are descendants of the tribe of Naphtali, they said, "We are not Jews, we are Israelites." And here you see it being discussed, saying, "We are not the descendants of those Jews who returned from Babylon to Jerusalem in the time of Ezra. We are people," he is saying, "who preceded them in leaving the land of Israel, because they left when the Assyrians came and took them captive and then sent them throughout the Assyrian Empire, specifically around the empire of the Medes. And then, of course, as the Medo-Persian Empire took over, many of these Israelites were able to travel throughout the Medo-Persian Empire, which was much more extensive than the Assyrian Empire. And one of the places that some of these tribes, Naphtali and Issachar, traveled to would have been Uzbekistan. So that's what it's talking about here. And then on page 293, it says, Wolf replied that he was traveling in order to preach Jesus to the Jewish nation and to find out the 10 tribes of Israel, from which tribes it was believed that the Jews of Bukhara, Samarkand, and Balkh were sprung, and also the Afghans, which we're going to get to Afghanistan shortly. Consequently, Wolf intended to go from thence to Kabul and to the Punjab, which is Afghanistan. But again, letting this soak in, he's saying that the 10 tribes of Israel, from which tribes it was believed that the Jews, they're known as Jews only because of the other tribes being lost to Westerners. So anybody that was identified it just became, they just became known as Jews, but they're not really Jews. They are from the 10 tribes of Israel, specifically from Naphtali and Issachar. Continuing on page 301 now, this Joseph Maccabee actually reformed the Jewish nation of Bukhara, Samarkand, and Balkh, for they all came to see the great Joseph Morgrebi, i.e. Joseph Maccabee, the African, and ever since his time, they have got their Bibles and Talmudic writings from the Jews of Orenburg in Siberia and from the great marketplace in Russia called Makariev. They also told Wolf that in the time of Genghis Khan, and he ruled that area of Central Asia from 1206 to 1227 CE, a great number of the Jewish nation of Khorasan, Balkh, and Kabul went to China. We saw in the video that Simcha Jacobovici went to China trying to trace down if there were any Israelites there. And he said, of course, that there were very, very few left. And the gentleman who was interviewed, he gave that explanation that 300 years prior to that time, there was a thriving Israelite community, but that through various political situations and persecution, the synagogues were shut down, the rabbis left, and so most of the Jews had left from there. And I don't know if you noticed in the video when the question was asked, does he think he's a Jew? It's like the guy, you could tell by his reaction, is like, what is this idiot saying? Do I think I'm a Jew? I know I'm a Jew. Who is he? So these people knew who they were. They know who they are. They're not lost to themselves. Just that these 10 tribes were lost to Westerners who only recognized the Jews that you have read about that were in the Roman Empire, the Greek Empire, and that eventually moved to different parts of Europe and then went to Northern Africa, some that went to America, et cetera, and the ones that you see in Israel today. But these people were lost to Westerners, and only a few people sought to find out where these tribes were, and they were successful in tracking some down. And we see this with Joseph Wolf being able to track some down. So, and it is a striking fact, continuing in the book, that the Jesuits show in their letters edifiantes, that when speaking to the Jews of China, they were informed by them that they had originally come from Persia to China, and Bukhara at diverse times belonged to Persia. And again, what this is saying is that the Israelites from the 10 tribes, they first were taken by the Assyrians, placed in different parts of the Assyrian Empire. And then when the Medo-Persian Empire took over, the Israelites were able to spread out some more, do some traveling, and even went as far as to China. Now on page 302 and 325, through the Jews in Bukhara, and remember, whenever you're seeing this word Jews, it's actually Israelites, but just the moniker Jews is placed on these tribes because these tribes were not known to Westerners, so they just called them Jews. So through the Jews in Bukhara, Wolf was made acquainted with the fact that upon the heights of the Oro Mountains, many of the tribe of Naphtali still inhabit the clefts of the rocks. And then on page 325, Wolf is desirous of giving the results of his investigation respecting the 10 tribes in Bukhara and Turkestan. There cannot be the slightest, please pay attention to this, there cannot be the slightest doubt that the Jews in Khorasan, which is a part of Iran today, Bukhara, Samarkand, and Balkh, which are all a part of Uzbekistan, and also in Shar Shabaz, as well as the descendants of Genghis Khan and the Nogay Tatars, and those called of the tribe of Naphtali are all remnants of the 10 tribes. This is not a hypothesis, but a relation of their own assertions. So now we're going to talk about the lost tribe of Zebulun. Excuse me, the lost tribe of Zebulun. We covered Naphtali and Issachar. Now we're moving on to the lost tribe of Zebulun. And they have been discovered in India and Pakistan. This is taken again from the documentary Quest for the Lost Tribes by Simcha Jacobovici.
We may have identified as many as 4 of the 10 lost tribes of Israel, Menashe, Dan being the Ethiopians, and Issachar and Naphtali among the Bukharan Jews of Central Asia. And if we were right to think of the Bukharans as the descendants of Naphtali, then maybe we should be looking for Zevulon, because Zevulon was the brother tribe of Naphtali in ancient Israel. And history records that at the same time as the Naphtalites were ruling Central Asia in the 5th and 6th centuries, another tribe was ruling parts of Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India. This tribe was called Zevulon. So maybe we could find in the Indian subcontinent, not on the border of Burma, descendants of the Zevulon, just as we had found descendants of the Naphtalites in Central Asia.
Of our research, we repeatedly came across a little-known group in India that could not be easily related to other Jews. So we made our way to Bombay in search of Zevulon. Bombay is home to 8 million Hindus and 1 million Muslims. Here we found a community numbering about 5,000. That by all accounts should have assimilated into the dominant culture long ago. And though they do not call themselves by any particular tribal name, significantly, like the lost tribes, and unlike other Jews, they call themselves the children of Israel, not Judah.
I am not Yehudi, I am Bnei Israel. Yehudis, those Jews who migrated to India from Baghdad. My family is Bnei Israel.
"300 years ago, a Jewish merchant traveling through the coastal region was stunned to see Indian peasants chanting Jewish prayers. Fascinated, he stopped to inquire as to how they knew these prayers, and was shocked when they replied that they were Israelites who had lived in India from ancient times. Skeptical of these claims, the merchant visited a village and presented the Bnei Israel with an assortment of fish to be made into a meal, some kosher, some not. When he saw that the villagers knew which fish were kosher, he was convinced that they were an Israelite community, and he helped them return to Judaism. Unique to the Bnei Israel community is the Melita Ceremony, which is a kind of offering of rice, scented flowers, and fruit. Though they had forgotten the reasons behind some of their practices, the Bnei Israel had clung to them as something precious to be passed through the generations.
They were observing certain rules and regulations of Judaism. And when they got an opportunity of being told as to what the meaning was of that particular thing, they were only too happy Why should they lose? And nobody forced us. If they had said, no, you must become Hindus or you must become Mohammedans, but nobody ever forced us because we were such a minority in the whole population of India. Nobody worried about us.
But what if they were not always a tiny minority? What if the mysterious rulers of northern India in the 5th and 6th centuries were indeed the lost tribe of Zevulon?
The Bene Israel community's own historian, his name was Chaim Kar, wrote a book about the Bene Israel at the turn of the 20th century. He believed that they are descendants of the lost tribes. He thought the tribes were scattered to the ends of the earth, and some made their way to India. He talks about various practices they have and compares them to the rituals of the Jerusalem temple. For example, the Melita Ceremony. He argues that in an earlier period, they even had sacrifices like those in the temple. But these are all speculations. There's no documentation or proof.
After nearly 3 millennia, there may not be proof, but there is a tantalizing hint. The holiest site for the Bnei Israel of India is a rock outcrop 100 kilometers south of Bombay. Here we learned that the most revered figure for the Bnei Israel is not King David or Abraham or even Moses. It is the prophet Elijah.
The Jews in India believe that the prophet Elijah went to heavens from this place. The mark of his chariot can be seen on the stone rock that we are standing on. The hooves can be seen laid down there, and they said that his chariot slipped here, and on the top of the mountains over there you can see another sign of the hooves of his horses.
Using the rock as a kind of altar, the Bnei Israel make an offering of coconut on the mark of Elijah's chariot. This veneration of Elijah is suggestive, since Elijah was the prophet of the Israelite tribes that came to be lost. But how would they have gotten here? The community has its own myth of origin.
2,000 years ago, a ship of Israelis got caught in a storm, and the ship was wrecked on the coast of Bombay. And only 7 couples survived that particular shipwreck. And the 7 couples landed at a place known as Navgaon. And we are supposed to be the offshoot of those 7 couples.
It makes more sense that those Israelites came not directly from Israel, but from the north. That is, the area of the Silk Route. Israelites of the tribes exiled by the Assyrians became involved in the silk trade, trading along one of the branches of the ancient route that became known as the Silk Route. I believe that these Israelites got as far as Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Kashmir. From there, they got to where the Persian Gulf meets the Indian Ocean, and then, in the course of their trade, they may have sailed along the Indian coast.
Whichever way they got here, the Bnei Israel can still point to the graves where the survivors of the shipwreck are said to be buried. It now seems that we can draw a plausible link between the Bnei Israel and seafarers coming from the north. But does this prove that the ancient rulers of northern India had any connection whatsoever to the lost tribe of Zevulon?
We have coins that say Javul on them. We have recorded history of their capital city called Baruch, which in Hebrew means blessed. We know that the title of their king was Mir HaGola, which in Hebrew means light of the exile. And we know the name of the king. Their most famous king was Torah Mana, which in Hebrew or Hindi means, or seems to mean, belief in the Torah, faith in the books of Moses. So unless these were all coincidental, we could speculate that the Zavula of India and Pakistan were really the lost tribe of Zevulon.
As if responding to an ancient call, many of the Bnei Israel of Bombay have returned to their ancestral home in Israel. They gravitate towards Elijah's cave and continue to demonstrate their reverence for the biblical prophet. Elijah's cave is in the old territory of Zevulon.
Standing in this cave, I must confess that I felt that I was in the twilight zone, because I was among people who were acting out a script that was written almost 3,000 years ago. And they seemed to be fixated on the prophet that warned the tribes of their exiles and promised them redemption in the end of days.
This is also very interesting, because what you see is that these individuals recognize also that they are not Jews, they are Israelites. They understand that they are descendants of Zebulun, of the tribe of Zebulun. So again, very, very interesting. It's something else that's extremely interesting. They hold up as their most revered figure, Elijah. Now, this is in India and Pakistan where they're practicing this, and they uphold Elijah as their chief figure. And when they go to Israel, to visit Israel, where do they go? They go to the area where Elijah was, Elijah's cave. And where is that? It's in the territory of Zebulun. So absolutely amazing. Well, I told you about Benjamin of Todela earlier, because that was quoted in the documentary earlier. So now we're going to read some of his writing. He was a traveler, and he traveled. He's a Jewish traveler who visited Europe, Asia, and Africa between 1165 and 1173 CE. So this is close to 700 years before Joseph Wolff was traveling. And this is in the book titled The Itinerary of Benjamin Todela. In here, he writes, in Ghazna, this great city on the river Gozan, there are about 80,000 Israelites. That's the original place where the Israelites were sent to, one of the places. It is a city, and this is when the Assyrians took them captive around the 700s BC. It is a city of commercial importance. People of all countries and tongues come there with their wares. The land is extensive. From there, it is 5 days, excuse me, from there it is 5 days to Samarkand, which is the great city on the confines of Persia. In it live some 50,000 Israelites, and Obadiah the Nasi is their appointed head. Among them are wise and very rich men. From there, it is 4 days' journey to Tibet, the country in whose forest the musk is found. From there, it takes 28 days to the mountains of Niaspur by the river Gozan. So now this is a different place that they're talking about. And this is the new place that the Israelites would have gone to. And so when they moved from one place of Gozan, they named another place Gozan. And there are men of Israel in the land of Persia who say that in the mountains of Niaspur, 4 of the tribes of Israel dwell, namely the tribe of Dan, the tribe of Zebulun, the tribe of Asher, and the tribe of Naphtali. So he's also talking about the tribe of Zebulun, just like Joseph Wolff did, being in this same area. And they were included in the first captivity of Shalmaneser, king of Assyria, as it is written in 2 Kings chapter, that looks like 18, verse 11. And he put them in Hala and in Habor by the river Gozan and in the cities of the Medes. The extent of their land is 20 days' journey, and they have cities and large villages in the mountains. The river Gozan forms the boundary on the one side. They are not under the rule of the Gentiles, but they have a prince of their own, whose name is Joseph Armakala, the Levite. There are scholars among them, and they sow and reap and go forth to war as far as the land of Cush by way of the desert. So they go far south into Sudan and Ethiopia, which is the land of Cush. And here you'll see some of these areas that were talked about. You see in right above where it says Iran, you have Naya Sapor, that's the place he was talking about. If you go over to the right where you see Afghanistan and then you look up, there is Khorasan. And when he was talking about Gozan, you see also right above where it says Afghanistan, there's Ghazni, that's the same place as Gozan that he was talking about. A little bit later, we're going to hear about Herat. This is the city Herat that we're going to hear a little bit about when he talks about some of the Israelites being found in Afghanistan. Right now, he's talking about the ones that were in India and Pakistan, and talking about all these areas where he traveled through and spoke to people about the supposed lost 10 tribes of Israel. You see, again, above where it says Ghazni and Herat, there's Khorasan. That's an area that he mentioned. Then you'll see Balk, which has been mentioned on several occasions. That's where a number of the Naphtalites and descendants of Issachar migrated to. If you go up a little bit further and to the left, you see Bukhara. And then if you go to the right of Bukhara, you see Samarkand. So these, and that's all in Uzbekistan, which we covered before. So this is the area that's being discussed by Benjamin of Todela and also by Joseph Wolf, that also Simcha Jacobovici is talking about. So now we come to the lost tribes of Ephraim, Reuben, Gad, and Simeon, who have been found in Afghanistan and Pakistan. The lost tribes of Ephraim, Reuben, Gad, Simeon, who have been found in Afghanistan and Pakistan.
Because the brother tribe of Manasseh was Ephraim. So perhaps we had to look for Ephraim. For that, we had to go back to our treasure map. We had to go back to the Bible.
In the 8th century BC, the biblical account of the facts is fully reliable about the reasoning, about the whys and hows, that is something else. But about what happened, we can fully trust the biblical account. It is fully parallel to what we found in archaeological excavations.
I look at things as a believer. For me, the scriptures are paramount. In the book of Kings, we find in several places references to where the tribes were exiled to. Also in the book of Chronicles. It says in these texts that they were exiled to 5 places. First, the mountains of the Medes. This is in the direction of Kurdistan and the Caucasus. Second, the river Gozan. Third, Hala. Fourth, Hara. And last, Havor. Where are these places?
In modern Syria, there are places that roughly correspond to the biblical locations. There is a river called Havor, and nearby there is a city called Gozan.
It's very interesting. A few documents were found recently in a city on the river Habur called Durkatlimu, a German excavation, and in 1993 they were published. Only 4 documents, I think, and in 1 or 2 of them there are Israelite names. One of them is Hezekiah. Now the date is the first year 2 or what of Nebuchadnezzar. So that means they are not Judeans. They definitely are Israelites. Israelites in the area of Khabur, where they should be.
Today there are no Israelites waiting by the river Khyber. But what if they moved east, taking their place names with them? One of the passes between Afghanistan and Pakistan is known to the world as the Khyber Pass. The Khyber Pass is one of the most lawless and dangerous places on earth. It is the heart of Pakistan's northwest frontier, the Wild West of the East. The first thing one notices is that the Pakistani government has no real authority here. The only way to obtain safe passage is to travel with an armed escort from the ruling people in the area, the Pathans. They have guarded the Khyber Pass for more than 2,000 years, driving away Genghis Khan, the British Army, and most recently, the Soviets.
In Hebrew, it's known as Khyber Pass, the same name as in the Bible. And next to the Khyber Pass, there's a city called Peshawar in Pakistan. Peshawar means the same thing, the Khyber Pass. So we thought, could the Khyber be Khyber in the Bible? If it is, there should be here a river called Gozan. And right there, flowing into the Kabul River, is the river Ghazni. If this is Khyber, we thought, there should be somewhere around here, the city Hara. And 300 kilometers away, in Afghanistan, there's a city Herat.
The whole world knows this area as a hotbed of Islamic fundamentalism. There are 15 million Pathans and not a single Jew among them. But we set out to investigate whether under the Islamic surface lies an Israelite past. The first clue was the fact that the Pathans claimed to descend from Afghan, son of King Saul of Israel. From their perspective, Afghanistan is an Israelite name. At worship, they seem like any other Muslims. When studying the Quran, however, they rock their bodies in the manner of Jews. To this day, it is an ancient code called Pukhtunwali, rather than Islamic law, which commands their ultimate loyalty.
It is said about Pushtun, Pushtun is really is a fifth religion itself. Is not. We have got our own code of conduct, and not that whatever the Quran says. Pushtun all believe in that. We don't do much of the things which are not conveyed by Quran really. That's why it is said, it is a proverb that Pushtun nim Quran namani, or Pukhtu pinzam mazhab dewi. You know.
Pukhtuwali, the code of the Pukhtu. And what is this Pukhtuwali? It's basically Old Testament law in a kind of unforgiving way, where you don't have any kind of rabbinical softening of it. Eye for an eye means eye for an eye, literally. Adultery, you're finished.
If there is a conflict between your own Pukhtunwali law and Islam, which do the Pathans choose?
Our customs are those of the Pushtun, or Pathan. There are 11 Pathan tribes in the Khyber. We all have the same customs. The main law here is the Islamic Sharia. But we Pathan follow our own specific Pukhtunwali customs. For example, according to Islam, there must be established evidence for the conviction of adultery. You cannot convict anyone without sufficient evidence of fact. But according to Pukhtunwali, if there is even the slightest suspicion of an illegitimate relationship between a man and a woman, both are convicted and killed. The matter is closed, and there is nothing left to discuss.
As in the Bible, the Pathans still engage in animal sacrifices for religious purposes.
I am of the Musahel, the people of Moses. We make sacrifices of sheep. For example, at a wedding festival, our elders would sacrifice 4 sheep. Today, when times are good, a man can sacrifice 10 sheep. We make these sacrifices to please God and the people too. Also, some people used to light oil lamps on Friday nights to ask for forgiveness and blessings from God. Such are our traditions.
We are in a country that is supposedly dominated by Muslims, but not Muslims, just any Muslims, Muslim fundamentalism. And yet we come face to face with people that say we are Musahel. We are from the people of Moses. And as we travel among these people who look like they stepped off the pages of the Bible, Semitic faces, long beards, biblical garb, prayer shawls, and as the evidence mounted, we could not help but feel that maybe here among the Pathans of Afghanistan and Pakistan, we would find the answers to our quest.
We were astounded to learn that the Pathans adhere to biblical laws that were thought to have disappeared thousands of years ago. As in the Bible, those accused of manslaughter can escape to designated cities of refuge.
It is mentioned in our old books that if you kill someone unintentionally, then you can flee to a designated place of refuge. Our books tell us that Moses ordered Joshua to establish cities of refuge and told the people that they should honor them. Today, we educated people think it is backwards to protect a criminal in this way, but the people in those areas of refuge look upon the matter as holy. To protect a fugitive is the sacred job of the elders. They treat him as their guest.
It seems the Pathans are trapped in time, tenaciously adhering to their ancient ways. They've literally created a wall between themselves and the outside world. They live in these extended family compounds, their women hidden inside. As in the Bible, the Pathan women observe a code of modesty which rarely allows them to emerge.
I asked the Pathan, how could you have love songs when you keep your women hidden? It's what, a man singing a song to someone in the kitchen from the other room, the dining room? He said no, he laughed, and he said, all our love songs take place at wells. The only legitimate place for a woman in modesty to be seen is at the well. And immediately it struck me that every one of the biblical romances happens at a well. Moses meets Zipporah at a well, right? Jacob meets Rachel and Leah at the well. Rebecca for Isaac is met at the well. It's always at the well.
To enter the Pathan marketplaces is to step back in time. Defying all probabilities, the Pathans still live in tribal groups with Israelite names. Rabbani is similar to the tribe of Reuben, Levani, the tribe of Levi, and Shinwari, the tribe of Shimon. One Pathan tribe known as Gadun is very small in numbers, not unlike the lost tribe of Gad. Interestingly, the most numerous tribe among the Pathans is Afridi, and the most numerous tribe in ancient Israel was Ephraim. There is even a sub-tribe called Waziri, known for wearing its hair long. In biblical times, Naziri, such as Samson, also did not cut their hair. So you have Reuben, Gad, Ephraim, Shimon. 4 more tribes. So we'd actually located 9 of the tribes. Or let me put it differently. We think we located 9 of the tribes. If we haven't located 9 of the tribes, then it's a very strange coincidence going on that you have all these people with biblical names, with biblical practices, with an Israelite memory, exactly where they should be according to the biblical map. If someone can come up with another explanation, I'm open to it, but I couldn't understand it. There are people living among the Pathans who claim descent from the Assyrians and still preserve an oral tradition of the conquest of Israel.
Our tradition is that 2,700 years ago, my people conquered Israel and took the tribes there to the areas we ruled: Iran, Turkey, Armenia, Uzbekistan, and Afghanistan. The Israelites were taken to all of these places. They acted as our servants. They acted as tutors for the Assyrian children. They were also used in the army to help Assyria in warfare.
When I was young and had no beard, my grandfather's uncle died at the age of 115. We called him Baba, or grandfather. He used to say that we are the children of Israel. I was young, and at that age people forget things. They don't care much about history or talk of this kind. But now I would like to know, what are our origins? Where do we come from?
Our grandfathers always told us that we are from the Bani Israel, the children of Israel. They said the Jews are as Pathan as we are.
It's clear that a Judaic memory persists, but were there ever people here who openly identified with Judaism? If you look up Harat in the Encyclopedia Judaica, for example, you'll find 1 or 2 paragraphs. If you look up a Western Jewish community, you'll find pages and pages and pages. And when you look up Harat, it says the Jewish community may have been in Harat for somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 years. They're talking about a community that lived somewhere for at least 1,000 years, and there's a paragraph or 2 on them. What does this tell us? It tells us that they're lost to our consciousness, that they've fallen off the Western radar screen. In Harat, we find this cemetery covered with Stars of David and Hebrew script. For at least 1,000 years, it served one of the oldest continuous Jewish communities in the world. We needed harder evidence that the Pathans were of the lost tribes, so we went to the Afghani city of Kandahar, where in the 1950s a stone covered in ancient script was discovered. During the Soviet invasion, this stone was buried under rubble and surrounded by mines. Here, red dots mark undetonated mines, which we skirted to get to the site. "2,300 years ago, the Buddhist emperor Ashoka put up propaganda pillars throughout his empire. Until the Kandahar discovery, it was thought that these stones were always written in Sanskrit. But the stone buried here is written in Aramaic. In other words, the people then living here spoke in the everyday language of the Israelite tribes. We came here with a local elder in the hope of photographing it. But in its present state, that proved impossible.
It's under here. The stone is very big and there is ancient writing all over it. Same hard surface as this one, but no one can get to it now. This is definitely the place. There's no point in looking any further.
We did look further. We were tipped off that across the border in Pakistan, there was another stone rarely mentioned by Western scholars.
Look at that. There it is, right over there.
What is it? What is it?
Here, the stone was accessible. To our surprise, we discovered that it too was not written in Sanskrit, but in the Aramaic alphabet.
I see all the letters, the Aleph, the Ain, and I'm standing in front of this 2,300-year-old postcard from the Lost Tribes.
Now, again, this is amazing that you see, first of all, that one of the elders of the Pathans, he said that there are 11 tribes that make up the Pathans. We know that there were 10 tribes in the house of Israel that were taken captive by the Assyrians. So where do you get 11? Well, do you remember in the video where it was explained that there's a sub-tribe, the Waziri, who are like the Nazarites. So the Nazarites were not a separate tribe, but they were a sub-part, like Samson was a Nazarite, but Samson, in the story of Samson and Delilah, Samson is from the tribe of Dan, but he was also a Nazarite. So these Waziri that have the long hair, and you saw them dancing around, they're a sub-tribe. So really there are 10 tribes that comprise the Pathans. Absolutely, again, amazing. And they have Israelite names for each of the tribes, with the tribe from Ephraim being the largest tribe and the tribe of Gad being the smallest tribe. And then you also saw the gentleman who said that he is a descendant of the Assyrians, and he recognizes that the Pathans are the descendants of the Israelites that his ancestors had taken captive. And then you saw a number of other people testifying to how their fathers or grandfathers told them when they were smaller that they were descendants of Israel. And then the other thing you saw in the video was that the people, when they're praying, they rock back and forth like you'll see the modern day Jews do. So now we have covered, as Simcha has said, 9 of the 10 tribes. There's only one that's left, and that is Asher. But again, to show you this map, just so you can understand what was being covered, you saw where he talked about Herat, which is right above Afghanistan, and Ghazni, which is like the Gozan River, which is the original place that the Assyrians had taken them to, but in a different area. Herat, you heard him talking about Habor. Well, again, all these places, as the Israelites moved further east, they would have settled and named these places after places that they were familiar with, just like when Abraham, along with his brother Haran, were taken by their father, Terah, as they left Ur the Chaldees, and they went, and then they settled in a place, and they named it Haran after the brother of Abraham, and the son of Terah, who had died. And so this is what people do. They name places that they're familiar with. And so as people moved from where the Assyrian Empire was, which is over by Azerbaijan and Armenia and Turkey and the northern part of Iraq, where the Assyrian Empire was, as the Medo-Persian Empire took over after the Babylonian Empire, then the Medo-Persian Empire took over from the Assyrian Empire. And as the Medo-Persian Empire expanded eastward, all the way to India, you see that some of these Israelites also expanded along that line as well. So continuing, though, the Jews of Afghanistan. Now, this is taken from bh.org/il/Jews Afghanistan. And it says, various religious texts in Arabic and Hebrew collected by the Karaite Japheth ben Heli the Basra in the 10th century, which means the 900s AD, mentioned that the land of the east, the Khorasan region corresponding with northern Afghanistan, regions of northeastern Iran and southeastern parts of Central Asia, is inhabited by Jewish communities. And again, we read Jewish communities, think in your mind, actually tribes from Israel, some of the, quote, lost, unquote, 10 tribes. The biblical commentaries of Rabbi Sadiq Gaon and Karaite Daniel al-Kumisi also identified Khorasan as the region to which the Jews were exiled. El-Hajj Muhammad el-Idrisi, a Muslim historian who wrote around 1099 to 1166 of the Common Era, also mentions the Jewish communities in the cities of Ghazna and Naispur in his work on the historical tablets of the Bani Dajjal dynasty. He also mentions the Jewish community of Kabul in his book, The Delight of Him Who Deceives to Journey Through the Climates. So again, we see all of these references to where the 10 tribes were taken to by force through the Assyrians, and then where they voluntarily migrated to after the Babylonians took over from the Assyrians, and then the Medes and the Persians took over from the Babylonians. Going back to now Joseph Wolf on page 300 of his book, The Travels and Adventures of Joseph Wolf, he says, the Jews in Bukhara gave to Wolf the following account of themselves when the Elohim of Israel stirred up the spirits of Pul and then Tiglath-Pileser, kings of Assyria. They carried away the Reubenites and the Gadites and the half-tribe of Manasseh and were brought into Hala, which is now called Balk, and Habor, which is Samarkand, and Hara, which is Bukhara, and to the river Gozan, which the Europeans call Oxus. They lived in this empire for centuries until they were expelled by the Tishagate, the people of Genghis Khan, and then they settled in Sabirwa and Nishapur, which is Nagpur that we heard about before, in Khorasan and Shahriz Sabaz. And centuries afterward, the greater part returned from Shahriz Sabaz to Bukhara, Samarkand, and Balkh. So all of these people are testifying to the same things. Now, when it comes to this place, the river Gozan, which the Europeans called Oxus, I have a note here that says the Oxus/Amu Dara's watershed. So if you look for Oxus, you'll see where this is. It's a watershed in Central Asia that drains parts of modern-day Afghanistan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and Tajikistan into the Aral Sea. And then also it talks about the Khorasan. Some of the main historical cities of Persia are located in the older Khorasan. As an example, Nishapur, Nayashapur, and Tus, now in Iran, Merv and Sanjan, now in Turkmenistan, Samarkand and Bukhara, both now in Uzbekistan, Herat and Balkh, now in Afghanistan. So all of these areas are where the so-called lost 10 tribes were located. And this is up until 1861, according to this writing, and even up until the 2000s as Simcha Jacob Ovici did his travels and interviewed these various people. Now on page 293 of the same book, His Excellency then asked Joseph Wolf of what nation he was. Wolf replied that he was of the Jewish nation, but had embraced the religion of Jesus Christ and was now a naturalized subject of the King of England. Also that he was traveling in order to preach Jesus to the Jewish nation and to find out the 10 tribes of Israel, from which tribes it was believed that the Jews of Bokhara, Samarkand, and Balkh were sprung, and also the Afghans. Consequently, Wolf intended to go from thence to Kabul and then to the Punjab, which is what he did. Now we have another document, which is from the Project Canterbury, and the title of it is Some Account of the Afghans and of the Peshawar Church Mission. And this is talking about the Afghan nation, the origin of the Afghan nation. So it says, in 1784, Mr. Henry Van Sittart, a member of the Asiatic Society, addressed a letter to the learned president of that association, Sir William Jones, on the subject of the Israelitish origin of the Afghan people. Amazing. And enclosed a translation of an extract from a Persian book containing the tradition of the descent of the Afghans from the children of Israel. Sir Jones was much interested in the communication and appended the following remarks to the document, Asiatic Researches, 5th edition, volume 2, page 67. Here's his appended remarks. This account of the Afghans may lead to a very interesting discovery. We learned from the book of Esdras in 2nd Esdras 13:45 that the 10 tribes, after a wandering journey, came to a country called Ar-Sareth, where we may suppose they settled. Now, the Afghans are said by the best Persian historians to be descended from the Jews. They have traditions among themselves of such descent, and it is even asserted that their families are distinguished by the names of Jewish tribes, which is what we just saw in the video. And it's also very intriguing and interesting. All this evidence is being compounded, one on top of the other, talking about the best Persian historians also talk about how the Afghans are descended from the Israelites, the 10 tribes of Israel. So continuing on, it had said that these tribes of the Afghans, the Pathans in particular, they have names of Jewish tribes, although since their conversion to Islam, they studiously conceal their origin. I have an asterisk saying, on the contrary, they are very proud of it. As we saw, they know who they are. They discussed it. Their grandparents discussed it. Their parents discussed it with them. And they're not trying to hide. In fact, they have an interest in learning more about it. So the Pashto language, of which I have seen a dictionary, which we cannot ascertain what dictionary Sir William Jones could have seen in 1784, but this dictionary has a manifest resemblance to the Chaldaic. And Chaldaic is from Babylon, and we know that the Jews were taken to Babylon. So we're talking about having this relation, the 10 tribes having a relation with the 3 tribes of the house of Judah. And he says, and a considerable district is called Hazara, which might easily have been changed into the word used by Esdras. I strongly recommend an inquiry into the literature and history of the Afghans. Going back to Joseph Wolf on page 314, upon the heights of those mountains, which is Hindu Kush, also called the Indian Caucasus, the Kafir, Siapush are wandering. They call themselves Sema. These people who are the Siapush that are wandering, they call themselves Sema and are believed by some to be descendants of the army of Alexander the Great. But Wolf cannot help thinking that they are the remnants of the tribes of Israel. For the Jews in Bokhara themselves, who do not call themselves Jews, but the children of Israel, and who assert that they belong to the 10 tribes, say that these Kafir Seapush or Sema are their brethren whose ancestors had entirely forgotten their law and had fallen into the ancient idolatry of the Philistines. They call Elohim Imra, and they worship the figure of a fish called Dagon. They have in their mountains the 10 commandments written upon stone, and their women observe the law of purification, and these Kafir Seapush love the Jews. So while some people believe that these Seapush, Kafir Seapush, are descendants of the army of Alexander the Great, the Jews of Bahara, who themselves know that they're not Jews, ethnically from the tribe of Judah, Benjamin, or Levi, that they are descendants of one of the 10 tribes of the northern house of Israel. They say that these Kafir Seapush are indeed their brethren, and these Kafir Seapush love the Jews, or love them, who are known as Jews. So what's also interesting, and this is a little bit off the subject, but he's saying that these people, the Kafir Seapush, they've totally gone off the deep end and they've fallen into idolatry. And notice one of the figures that's used in their idolatrous practice. It is a fish called Dagon. Now, in modern Christianity, what you see is a symbol that some people use. It's a fish. I'm telling you, the Christianity that you see in the world today, the major Christianity, the Christian programs that you see on television, these are not true Christians. They may be good people, but they are not following what Jesus the Christ says. They're not disciples of Jesus the Christ. They are disciples of some false religion, like having a false idol, Dagon, that they're bowing down to. So you see these fish symbols on cars of so many people who profess that they are following the Bible, profess that they are following the teachings of Jesus the Christ, and that couldn't be further from the truth in so many instances. Now, people say, well, we have the symbol of the fish because Jesus turned the fish into a multitude of fish so that a lot of people could be fed, and that some of the earliest disciples were fishermen, and Jesus said, I'm going to make you fishers of men. Well, all of that is just, again, they're really stupid, idiotic reasoning to justify their idiotic, stupid beliefs. And I'm not calling the people stupid, but they do have stupid, idiotic, incorrect beliefs. And they are worshiping an idol, and they have as one of their idolatrous symbols the fish. And there's even a radio station where we are called The Fish. So go figure. But we can see that this figure of the fish is an idolatrous figure. So I'm going to read this again. And it says, these Kafir Seapush are their brethren whose ancestors had entirely forgotten their law and had fallen into the ancient idolatry of the Philistines. They call Elohim Imra, and they worship the figure of a fish called Dagon. Well, that's what you see in Christianity today, is a lot of idolatry. That's not biblical. It's not Christian. Just like, again, Christmas is not Christian. And a lot of Christians nowadays understand that, but they still say, oh, well, we do it for our children, and oh, it doesn't hurt anything. Well, God hates that. It's idolatry. One of the first commandments says, thou shalt have no other gods before me. And the third commandment says, or the second commandment says, thou shalt not make any graven images like a fish, or even people that use the cross as though it's some kind of a holy symbol. And you see the crosses all over the place. And people, it's almost like they think the cross has some magical power. And you've seen these vampire movies where someone who's being attacked by a vampire, and they hold out the cross, and that repels the vampire because the cross has some kind of magical power. That's idolatry. And you see idols all over Catholic churches, of course, they have these saints that they bow down to, and even Mary that they call the Mother of God. I mean, this is an abomination to God. Whew, boy, so we see that these people fell into that same type of thing because they have forgotten the worship of the true God. And that is the same thing that false Christianity has done. They have forgotten the true worship of God, which is based in the Hebrew text of what we call the Old Testament. What we call the New Testament quotes very often from what we call the Old Testament, and that was written in Hebrew. And the ones who wrote what we call the New Testament, they were Hebrew people. They were Hebrews, even though they wrote in Aramaic and it was later translated into the Greek language, because Greek was the main language that was spoken, even though the Roman Empire was extant at the time when much of the Bible was written. Still, Greek was the main language that was spoken, just like English today is the main language that's spoken around the world whenever people from different nations come together. Like at the United Nations, the official language is English. So, very interesting stuff that we see. And now we're coming to the end. We already read this once before, but I'm going to read this again. This is on page 301. This Joseph Marabi, who's also Joseph the African, he gave Bibles to people in Bukhara and Samarkand and Balkh. And then it says that they told Wolf, these people who had received the Bible, that in the time of Genghis Khan, a great number of the Jewish nation of Khorasan, Balkh, and Kabul went to China. And it is a striking fact that the Jesuits show in their letters Ediphantes that when speaking to the Jews of China, they were informed by them that they had originally come from Persia to China, and Bukhara at diverse times belonged to Persia. So again, that's just to help us remember geographically what happened is people went from what we call Asia, Central Asia, and moved further to the far east of Asia, all the way over to the far east of China. Okay, so then finally, when it comes to China, we're talking about the lost tribe of Asher. The lost tribe of Asher. Now I have let's say, a trivia question, not trivial, but a trivia question for you. And you should be able to get this answer, even though it's a trivia question. In the Bible, in what we call the New Testament, we know that the people are called Jews. And we know that, for instance, Paul said that he was of the tribe of Benjamin. We know that Matthew was of the tribe of Levi. Yeshua was of the tribe of Judah. And those are the three tribes that made up the southern house of Judah that were not taken captive by the Assyrians when the 10 tribes of the northern house of Israel were taken captive. In the Bible, we see those three tribes mentioned by name in the New Testament. In the New Testament, when we're talking about historical figures or people, when we see someone who is from one of the 10 tribes, and this is the only one of the 10 tribes that's mentioned in the New Testament where we're talking about somebody being a descendant of that tribe. So we know that in Revelation chapter 7, Revelation chapter 14, it talks about 12 of the tribes of Israel, but they're not talking about specific people by name coming from those tribes. So when it comes to the New Testament, there's only one of the 10 tribes that's mentioned where a person by name says that they are a descendant of that tribe. What tribe is that? Well, of course, you should know the answer because we're looking at the answer right now. This is a person from the tribe of Asher. So you go ahead and look that up in the scripture yourself and you'll see that. But that was the trivia question. Now getting back to our topic, the lost tribe of Asher, in parentheses, found in China. So we saw earlier about the Jews of Khyber in China, and that one gentleman who said, yes, I'm a Jew. And how dare you even ask me, do I think I'm a Jew? I mean, that's a stupid question. I know who I am. But anyway, let's go to reading this. Now, this is taken from a book called the Sefer Habarit HaKadosh, which means the discovery of the 10 tribes. It was published in Piotrkov in 1911. And a person named David Rutman is the one writing about this because he had acquired this book. And apparently he can read Hebrew, which I cannot. And apparently there's not an English translation of this book. So he's talking about it. And what he is saying is the long exile of the Jewish people has contributed to an often intense yearning for the Messiah, at times leading to attempts to locate the lost tribes of Israel, the Jews, and perhaps speed up the ultimate redemption. A record of one such interesting attempt is recorded in a book that I, David Rutman, acquired this week titled The Sefer Habarit HaKadosh, The Discovery of the 10 Tribes, which was published in Piotrkov in 1911. And so this is what it says. The book records information gleaned by a man named Uziel Haga from Boston, who petitioned then President of the United States, William McKinley, to join a U.S. Army expedition that was leaving to China. Permission was granted, and he traveled to China, meticulously recording the customs, the life, and habits of the natives he encountered. His findings convinced him that some of their customs, such as a 7-day period of mourning, were remnants of their Jewish past, and that the Jews in Kaifang in the Hunan province of China were descendants of the tribe of Asher. Haga argued that they were exiled to this area by the king of Ashur, which is the king of Assyria. And you can read about this. I found this at the Jewish Review, and you can see the link there. So now we have all 12 tribes that have been discussed throughout history in terms of their location, going all the way from modern day Iran and Iraq, all the way east to China, past India to China, making stops in Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan. Amazing. Okay, so this was part 2 in our 4-part series. Thank you for joining me in this program. I hope you'll join me in part 3 of our 4-part series, where we're going to be covering regathering Benjamin, Levi, and Judah. They are not, of course, and they never have been, lost tribes, lost to Western society. They are well known, but even this story is very, very intriguing. So I hope you'll come back for that program. Again, thank you for joining me in this program.